Let's see. Hello and welcome to the Warfare of Grace podcast. Oh man, this frame is much wider than it looks in the preview. So I'm still learning this whole thing. I'm Devin, and I am the counselor with Warfare of Grace. It's a group that focuses on healing from addiction to sexual behaviors. And I talk with guys all the time about how to get away from porn and unwanted sexual behavior. And we sit and do one-on-ones and all that stuff. And I thought it was about time to bring my voice to the conversation on a little bit different level. So today we're doing a bit of a test run here, but I wanted to talk about something that became relevant not too long ago. I was having a conversation with somebody about this not too long ago. It's a guy who's just started out working with coming out of addiction. And I should correct that a little bit. This is a guy that's been in recovery for a little while. And by that, I mean he's been working on it. He hasn't really been in deep. He hasn't been in like a program or something like that, but he's been working on trying to get away from addiction for quite some time. And that's significant because a lot of guys find themselves there, but in a sense that they haven't really, truly, earnestly moved into a pattern of healing. And that's kind of critical for what we're talking about today. So today we're going to talk about how we talk to our wives a little bit, and how do we talk to spouses, and what kinds of things are they hearing. And that's important to me, obviously, because as a Christian, I am really interested in marriages thriving. I'm really interested in Christ being honored by our marriages. I'm really interested in bringing glory to God in that, because I believe that the marriage, a union between two people, is the most pure place where the image of God can be seen. We see that unity that is talked about in the Trinity all the time. And so saving marriages in some sense is a preservation of the image of God in real time. So when we get into addiction recovery and we start talking about what it looks like to, with all these moving pieces, kids are involved, maybe your wife wants divorce. There's all sorts of elements like that. When we start to talk about that, I just want to put out there up front that I do have a leaning towards making the relationship work. And more than that, that the relationship is valuable beyond just the two people that are involved in it. It's beneficial on a divine level as well. And so today we're talking about how to talk to wives in that context. And I want to point out, so there's this guy, and he has let's say a deep care for his wife. And as is often the case with addiction recovery, people are torn because in one sense we see the obvious kind of confusion that goes along with having behaviors that don't match up to our beliefs. But then on the other side, we've got this genuine place inside of us that is saying, hey, I really, really care for my spouse. And I can't make the two align. There's two people inside of me, and they're fighting. And of course, in addiction recovery, we know this very well. We know that we have the thoughtful brain, we have the prefrontal cortex, the thinker, we have the higher reasoning brain, and then we've got the limbic system, the reactionary brain, the survival based brain, the brain that's programmed to repeat behaviors and really drives forward addiction. And so this guy's trapped between these two things, and in his passion for his wife, wrote a letter. And that letter is a whole bunch of stuff. And obviously, I'm not going to share it directly from any one example that's come through. But what I will say is that, like many men, this letter is full of, let's say, proclamations, promises, that sort of thing. So let's talk through this a little bit. What is needful? What is your wife needing in this time? Now, here's the context. If for the situation we're talking about someone who is actively involved in addiction to unwanted sexual behaviors. So they're doing things they don't want to do. They are enslaved to this behavior. They're also married. Maybe their kids involved. So their wife knows what's going on and is significantly hurt by this. And here's the question: what do they need in that context? Now, the first thing to point out is that The the greatest thing that a husband can provide to a wife, in my opinion, and in, let's say, the opinion of many, broad scope, what can we do for one another? We can provide security. So in some sense, there's a predictability that is most most beneficial for making them feel safe in the relationship, known in the relationship, feeling like they belong and that they can, they know where to put their hands. They know how to work in the world around them. They understand the kind of outcomes that they're going to get from the world. One of the troubles with addiction recovery is that it upsets this whole thing. It says to them, like, who knows what I'm going to get? Maybe I've got the loving husband today. Maybe I've got the angry husband today. Maybe I've got the acting out husband today. Maybe I've got the peaceful husband today. It's unpredictable and really sets people on edge. So because of that, what's been lost or what's been shooken up is this certainty. And that is the very thing that the person who is dealing, the person in recovery, the person who's dealing with unwanted sexual behaviors needs to begin to address. So they need to start thinking in terms of, okay, how do I live a life that provides stability again? And of course, this is terribly difficult because we're in the midst of trying to heal and we're realizing all of our bad places and all of our bad things, and we're realizing all of the stuff we've got to change. And for a guy, as you may know very well, a lot of guys think very directly about this. They'll think, okay, what do I need to fix? And that kind of thinking can generate an intense focus on our recovery, which can be good, but it can also create a very objective focus, which is not always good. And more than that, it can cause us to kind of, now that the cat's out of the bag, it's time to dump all this stuff and really work on it and really bring it to the forefront, which is just further destabilizing to our partners. So what can we do to really establish security? Well, one of the things we can do is we can watch the way we speak. And that's what we're talking about today. So in principle, a man can provide for his wife a secure emotional foundation for her to begin to process through all the hurt she's feeling. Now, that secure foundation is based on trust, and trust is a very hard thing to buy when you're in the midst of addiction. So what do you do? What do you do? Well, there's many things you can do, and we can talk about those, but as far as your speech goes, one of the things you can do is choose where your speech is going. So when you're going to talk about, intense things in the recovery process, it's probably best, though not always the case, but probably best, that you speak almost exclusively to a safe group of other men in a community environment where you can be loved and cared for. This is because you need answers, and or this hypothetical person needs answers, needs to be able to process, needs to be able to figure out what to do, how to implement discipline and all that stuff. That's really critical. But your wife cannot necessarily bear all of that weight because she's just finding out about this, and her whole boat is rocked, and she can't find center. And so and beyond that, she's going to have this desire to really pull back, or maybe really push forward. Maybe she's going to try to take over. Whatever the case, she's going to have desire to move to an unhealthy place. And that unhealthy place is based on that rocking of the boat that's come through the revelation of these unwanted behaviors. So having a group of people that can provide support for you that is not her directly is really healthy for you, but it's really healthy for her too, because she is then able to deal with her and engage with you insofar as she is related to it. But if you've been in addiction recovery very long, you would know it's not really about your spouse. Being addicted to sexual things is not about them. It's not their fault, even though they certainly play a part in your emotional state, and they play a part in, sexual things and all of that. They play a role, but that is very unlikely to be the core material for your acting out and such. So instead of taking all that core material and piling it onto her, we find a safe community where we can engage. The next thing I want to talk about is some specific things as far as engaging with her. This letter, some of the letters that I've seen, some of the proclamations that I've seen from guys to their wives, they go something like this. I want you to know how much I love you, and I'm just hurting inside. I'm all torn up, and you are the only love of my life, and this sort of thing. We see a few things in this kind of language that I just want to give you some quick warnings about, things to hopefully begin to understand what they're hearing when we say it. First off, wives will be really attuned to the hypocrisy of the behaviors that you're performing and the things you're proclaiming. So if we say things like, you are the only love of my life, what's she hearing? Let's be really honest. She's hearing, liar. You're a liar because you are loving this other thing so much that you're willing to jeopardize our relationship in order to keep it. And that just makes sense. If we turned that around, if we, did a little golden rule, do to others as they would do, as you would have them do to you. If we just flip around that concept and think about it from the other direction, we would know that that's exactly how we would feel. We would feel as though our spouse has not taken the time and effort, has not cared for us enough to put aside their sin and be an authentic relationship with us. And so when we're communicating with our wives, it's really, really important that we use consistent language that doesn't set out a scale that is hypocritical. And as you go through addiction recovery, you'll find that kind of language, while difficult sometimes to bring to the forefront, because you know what? It's hard to always be honest. It is hard. And it's hard to give honest assessments to how the relationship is going and that sort of thing. Because we have this idea that we're supposed to prop up some sort of like super relationship. We're supposed to have a totally perfect relationship, and that of course is insane. Nobody has a totally perfect relationship, but we have the idea that that's how it should be. It's developed by a lot of things, developed by our family structures, developed by the way we engage with, archetypes and media and all sorts of interesting things. But the point is, because we have a bent towards that sort of like trying to reflect a perfect relationship, what we end up doing is we end up proclaiming a kind of perfect relationship when that is obviously not the case. So, so we need to try to stay away from putting out any kind of language that is obviously false. One of the great things about this too is that it's going to put pressure on you. It's going to put pressure back on you, on the person who is acting out these unwanted sexual behaviors. It's going to put the pressure on you to then shift. You've got to live something different if you want to say something different. If you want to be able to tell her, I love you, then you better be living a life that shows that through the actions that you're doing. And I'm sorry, it doesn't work very well if you're doing these unwanted sexual behaviors. It doesn't communicate that love. It is incongruent. So one of the things we can do, I'll just come back to it, is really note that she's going to be able to see the hypocrisy from a mile away. Now, you may say, oh, well, she didn't. That's how I talk to my wife. She's very secure. Now, I have to talk here in generalities because I don't know you in particular. I don't know who will be watching this, but I can say this. Maybe your wife is reacting differently. Maybe she's not saying, no, you're such a hypocrite and this sort of thing. In general, that will be your wife defending that which she wishes you could get back to. So she will defend that perfection archetype. My friend, that is not healthy. It is not okay, because what you two are essentially doing is sharing in denial and propping up a lie in your life. Now, this is unhealthy for a lot of reasons, but I'll just point out two. One, it's unhealthy because it keeps you from healing. It keeps you from having the right pressure put on you to heal up and out of your sin so that God can be glorified and your relationship can be healthy and you can talk truth and you can have the peaceful fruit of righteousness. A little bit of Hebrews 12 in there, right? So it's not healthy for them. but it's also really not healthy for her, because what's happening with her, she too is developing trauma responses, and she too is developing coping mechanisms. And if all of that is based on the lie, then you will not achieve the very thing that I imagine deep in you. There's a place that says, I really want to be good to my wife. I really want her to be able to thrive under my leadership and guidance and that sort of thing. And I don't know, depending on where you're at with like how marriages is supposed to work and that sort of thing, just hear me when I say that. When I say leadership, I mean a tender, loving, care, emotionally supportive, and lifting up kind of leadership. A little Ephesians 5 and 6, right? So you don't want to get to a place where you two are participating in denial together. As a matter of fact, that's probably what you were doing before she found out about all of this. In some way, you two were sharing in denial. That doesn't make it her problem. It does mean that she participates in what's going on because she's your spouse, your wife. So that's the first kind of area of speech that you might want to watch out for. And if you have any questions about that, please throw them down in the comments or the chat and that sort of thing, so that I can know what you're thinking, and hopefully we can have a little bit of dialogue about that. So the first one is the hypocrisy. She's going to see that flip. The next one is, you'll notice as you're talking, oftentimes I'll see that guys are kind of setting out a, this is all really hard, but I'm playing the good guy. I'm playing the good guy. Don't forget, honey, I'm the good guy here. I'm trying to do it. I'm trying to fix it. Besides the fact that this often comes with a lot of promises, and those promises don't tend to stack up, particularly early on in healing recovery. Besides that, this good guy mentality is a really dangerous thing for you to prop up in your life. As far as healing and recovery. So let's talk about your side, then her side real quick. The good guy image is something I struggled with quite a bit. And what it is essentially this. For me, I might have said it this way. I have a good heart. I'm going in the right direction. I'm turning things over to God. I'm a good guy. And what that does is that allows me to feel very good about myself, but it also allows me to not let the appropriate pain come in to motivate me up and out of the way I'm hurting my spouse. So the fact is, we are not the good guy. We're not the good guy. Now, we can be the bad guy that turns into a good guy. There is redemption. There is salvation. There is healing. There is mercy. All these things are true, but we are not there, and our actions are not showing it. So we have to be able to admit to ourselves and in front of our wives that we are not the good guy right now. I'll switch over to her side. What's she hearing when we say things like, babe, I'm doing this and I'm doing that, and here's all these reasons why I'm a good person? What is she hearing? What is she thinking? Prove it. Prove it. My friends, I don't know where you're at in particular, but for the man who is struggling with addiction recovery, for the man who has hurt his wife, I just want you to hear, your words aren't going to mean much. And all the, hey, look at all the good stuff I'm doing, isn't going to mean much until you've done those good things for a long time. Think about what we were talking about earlier. She's had a huge shakeup. The boat is going all over the place, and she doesn't know what to do. She feels insecure. She feels like everything's moving around. She doesn't know how to find her footing. What happens when she trusts you for 5 seconds, or we'll say 5 days? We'll give you some credit for 5 days, and then you act out. What happens? And then she finds out about it. Everything gets thrown up again. And pretty soon what she learns is that which you say about how good you are simply is not how you're going to behave. And you know what? On some levels, that's fair. It's fair that she would note that. You would note the same thing if it was turned around. Matter of fact, I've heard a lot of guys note the same thing because, sexual addiction is not just contained to men. And it's not just contained to one person in a relationship. Oftentimes, There's trouble going both ways. And so she will note that our promises and our behaviors do not add up. So all this good guy stuff is unfortunately unfounded. The way you found it is by developing a life of trust, a life of doing the right thing, a life where you do say what you're going to do and then you do it. Now, let me be clear. I think it's important that we recognize that the promises we make are generally a bad idea. I love the way scripture deals with this. What does it say? It says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Anything beyond this is not of God. What is it saying? Here's just a personal takeaway. I think what it's saying is, look, if you have to justify your yes or justify your no, you're not trustworthy enough to pull it off anyway. Something like that. And so I want to encourage you to think in terms of, if I say I'm taking out the trash, I'm taking out the trash. That's it. You know, I'm not going to beat around the bush. I'm not going to give her reason to not believe me. I'm just going to do the thing I said I'm going to do. And in that way, just like I said at the beginning, we can provide an emotional stability, an environment where she has the potential to heal, not where we can make her heal, but where she has the potential to heal because we have become consistent, safe, steadfast. So the good guy image is a big old prove it sign for her. So what's the first? Hypocrisy. You know, she's going to see hypocrisy so quickly. Second, the good guy image. She's just going to say, prove it. And the last thing I want to talk about today, and there's so many, oh my gosh, there's so many more things we could point out. But the last thing is that, and she'll feel this very deeply, in a lot of our language, we tend to put the pain that we're experiencing out there in a way that encourages them to feel bad for us. In other words, we claim victimhood. Now, I'm going to be really clear. You've probably heard a phrase something like hurt people, right? It's the idea that people who are acting out sexually, generally speaking, have trauma in their past, and that trauma is informing their behavior, and that is a totally legitimate explanation for what's going on. But what it's not is a legitimate excuse for what's going on. So we are, those of us who struggle with unwanted sexual behaviors, we are, in some sense, victims. However, that doesn't alleviate us from the responsibility over our own actions. And when we start to play the victim card with our wives, who very often have been our biggest supports in our lives. So what are we doing? We're looking for a little support. Problem is, they're the people we've sinned against, and they've got this shaking boat, and they can't come to our aid right now. So when we express this victimhood, all they can think is, you want me to feel bad for you? Now, again, I don't want to speak for all women. I'm speaking in general here. And if your spouse has a different reaction, that is totally fine. And I encourage you to explore that out, particularly with someone who can help translate between the two of you, like what's really going on. But in general, they just don't want to hear a thing about your victimhood. Okay? And I'll put it this way for you. I can acknowledge that I have been hurt and that hurt has informed what's going on with me. I can hurt over that, grieve over that, work with that, and resolve that so that I have new ways to handle it. And that's all fine. But the minute I make that grieving process my wife's problem, I have steered all the way out of healing recovery. I have steered out of healthy recovery and into we'll say it plainly, it can be abusive, right? It's abusive because she needs to heal. If you read through Ephesians and you look at the conversation to wives and husbands, I think it rises right out of the text pretty clearly. This sort of principle: guys go first. Guys go first. And we are to be the sacrificial ones, the ones that pick up our cross first. Okay. Because of that, yeah, because of that, I think that this, hmm, yeah, because of our need to go first, we are to establish safety for them, and we are to take the onus on us. We are not to make it their problem to solve our problems, for sure. Um, we are to recognize, in some sense, their victimization by us is more important than our victimization by someone else. And the things we do are our responsibility. I hope that last little bit made sense. You guys will learn this about me. I've got a little bit of a hyperactive brain. I can run off in all sorts of directions sometime. So there's three things about our speech towards our wives in the midst of healing that can be uh, hurtful and damaging to them, for sure. Maybe some of what our wives are thinking. In terms of the last one, just remember they they are the victim, right? They are the victim. We have victimization too. We have been hurt too. But as far as we're concerned, in the protection of our marriage, in the protection of our relationship, in the protection of our spouse, we have to accept that their victimization is more significant than ours. In Philippians 2, we see that great passage where it says, in humility, consider others as better than yourselves. And I think this is a proper application of that verse. All right. All that being said, here's the three things. So watch the hypocrisy. Remember that they're going to see that, and they're going to be really hurt over that in your language. The victim stance. If you take a victim position, they're just going to think to themselves, "I'm the victim, not you." And finally, the good guy image. It's best not to play games with that. It's best to have an honest assessment of who and how you actually are. Now, remember, that also means you're not just beating on yourself either, right? If you do good things, you do good things, and that's good. But if you did bad things, you do bad things, and that's bad. And it's so interesting how, in the midst of addiction recovery, so often we forget that. We forget those basic things. Our brain has become skewed to the point where we can't uh, uh, process those basic elements. We have a hard time implementing them in real time. Okay, well, thanks for joining me for this little segment of the Warfare of Grace podcast. If you have any questions or anything, be sure to put them in the comments section and all that. Like, subscribe, and all of that, so I can keep doing this. And this will be going up as a podcast relatively soon as well. And I hope you all have an awesome day. Don't forget, you are loved.